The story you're about to hear isn't a fairy tale. It's a chilling reminder of what happens when love is tangled with lies and ambition. It's the story of Jonathan Devereux, a man who built an empire on charm and ruthlessness, and the woman he cast aside at her most vulnerable. On a rain-slicked New York night, he handed his pregnant wife divorce papers, choosing a supermodel over his own unborn child. He called her simple, ordinary, a nobody he had outgrown. What he didn't know was that the nobody he just abandoned was Genevieve Sterling, the sole heiress to the multi-billion-dollar Ethelred Technologies fortune. And she was about to teach him the true meaning of power. The rain fell in relentless sheets against the panoramic windows of the penthouse, mirroring the cold, sterile silence that had descended upon the room. Just an hour ago, this space had been filled with the scent of roasted chicken and the quiet hum of Genevieve's hopeful heart. Now it felt like a mausoleum, a glass and steel tomb, 48 stories above the glittering, indifferent streets of Manhattan. Genevieve Sterling, or as the world knew her, Genevieve Devereux, sat numbly on the edge of a white leather sofa that had cost more than her first car. Her hands were pressed protectively over her stomach, a gesture that had become second nature over the past 3 weeks. Inside her, a new life, a tiny secret she had been waiting for the perfect moment to share, was blossoming. The perfect moment she had thought would be tonight, a celebration of their 5th anniversary. In her purse, nestled beside her wallet, was a small, grainy ultrasound picture, a tiny, pulsating flicker of life. Their life. Jonathan Devereux stood by the window, his back to her. His silhouette was sharp, imposing, framed by the city lights. He hadn't even taken off his custom-tailored Brioni coat, droplets of rain still clinging to the expensive wool. He was a statue of success, a man carved from ambition and polished by public adoration. His real estate empire, Devereux Holdings, was the darling of Wall Street, and he its charismatic king. "I don't understand," Genevieve whispered, her voice, barely a tremor in the cavernous room. "Jonathan, please, talk to me. What happened?" He turned slowly, and the warmth she had loved, the crinkle around his eyes when he smiled, was gone. In its place was an unnerving coolness, a dismissive impatience she had only ever seen him direct at incompetent subordinates. "It's over, Jen," he said, his tone flat, devoid of emotion. "I've filed for divorce. My lawyer sent the papers to your email an hour ago." Her world tilted on its axis. "Divorce, Jonathan, it's our anniversary. I cooked your favorite meal. We were supposed to talk about the future." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. It was a gesture of frustration, as if her confusion were an inconvenience. "The future is what this is about. My future. Look, you've been a good wife. You've played the part well. The quiet, supportive spouse behind the scenes. It was suitable. For a time. Suitable." The word was a slap. She had poured her soul into their marriage, into him. She had abandoned her own quiet ambitions in art curation to support his relentless climb. She had advised him on deals, her sharp intellect, hidden behind a demure smile, offering insights he would later present as his own strokes of genius. She had done it all for love, for the man she thought he was. "Yes, suitable," he repeated, walking over to the marble-topped bar and pouring himself a whiskey. He didn't offer her one. "But my world has changed. The circles I move in now, they require a different kind of partner. Someone with presence. Someone who shines." And then he said the name that had been whispered in gossip columns for weeks, a name Genevieve had desperately tried to ignore. "I'm with Victoria Vance." Victoria Vance, the supermodel of the moment, with legs that stretched for miles and a face that graced the cover of every major fashion magazine. Genevieve had seen the pictures of them leaving a gala. Jonathan's hand possessively on the small of her back. He had called it a business dinner, a networking opportunity. He had lied with the same ease he breathed. Genevieve felt the bile rise in her throat. She stood up, her legs unsteady. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Jonathan, it's a fling. The papers are always writing things. We can work through this. He let out a short, cruel laugh. A fling, Genevieve, you're so naive. This is real. What we had, he gestured around the opulent apartment. This was the arrangement. And the arrangement has concluded. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. The carefully constructed world she had inhabited for 5 years was crumbling around her. And then a spark of fight, fueled by the tiny life inside her, flickered. There's something you don't know, she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. She reached for her purse, her hand trembling as she fumbled for the ultrasound photo. I'm pregnant. She held it out to him, a fragile black and white offering of hope. We're having a baby. Jonathan stared at the image. For a heart-stopping second, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, shock, perhaps even conflict. But it was extinguished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of cold fury. Pregnant. He spat the word as if it were a curse. He didn't take the photo. You did this on purpose. You thought you could trap me. A last, desperate move to hold on. No, she cried, the accusation striking her with physical force. I just found out I wanted to tell you tonight to surprise you. He took a step towards her, his face a thunderous mask. Don't lie to me. It changes nothing. In fact, it makes this cleaner. It proves you're not the person I should be with. He gestured dismissively. This is a complication, a problem to be managed. My lawyer will handle it. There's a settlement clause in the prenup for this eventuality. The prenup, a document his team of lawyers had drafted, a thick stack of pages she had signed without much thought, blinded by love and the belief that it would never be anything more than a formality. The settlement is generous for someone like you. He continued, his voice dripping with condescension. $1 million. It's more than you would have ever seen in your life without me. Take it. Get rid of the complication and start over somewhere quiet. $1 million. To him it was pocket change, a rounding error on his net worth. To her it was an insult of epic proportions, a price tag he had placed on their marriage, their child, their entire life together. Someone like me, she whispered, the full weight of his contempt finally crashing down on her. Yes, he said, his eyes sweeping over her simple navy dress, her minimal makeup, her entire being as if she were a piece of furniture he was discarding. You're a sweet girl, Genevieve, but you're ordinary. You were the librarian from Brooklyn when I met you. I gave you this world, he gestured around them, and now I'm taking it back. You don't belong here anymore. The last remnants of her hope died. The man she loved didn't exist. He had been a phantom, a projection of her own desires. In his place stood this monster, a man so consumed by his own reflection that he would discard his own child like a bad investment. She lowered the hand, holding the ultrasound picture. Her gaze hardened, the tears ceasing, as a cold, unfamiliar resolve began to crystallize in her veins. He had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was divorcing a simple librarian from Brooklyn. He had no idea he had just declared war on the House of Sterling. "Get out," she said. Her voice, low and steady, imbued with an authority that made him pause. He blinked, taken aback. "This is my apartment, Genevieve. And you have just made it abundantly clear that I am no longer welcome in your life. So for the last time, get out of my sight." He scoffed a smirk playing on his lips. Fine. Have your little dramatic moment. My assistant will arrange for your things to be collected. You have 24 hours to vacate. He turned, adjusted his coat, and walked to the door without a backward glance. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing the final brutal closing of a chapter in her life. Genevieve stood alone in the silence, the city lights painting patterns on the floor. She slowly sank back onto the sofa, her body racked with silent sobs. She cried for the man she thought she had married. She cried for the future that had been stolen, and she cried for the innocent child who would now be born into a war. But as the storm outside raged on, the sobs subsided, replaced by a chilling calm. The pain was still there, a raw, gaping wound. But beneath it, the sterling blood in her veins, the legacy of a man who had built a global tech empire from nothing, began to stir. Jonathan Devereux thought he was ridding himself of a simple, ordinary wife. He was about to find out how extraordinary and how dangerous she could be. The name Sterling was not one that appeared in gossip columns or on the society pages. It was a name whispered in the hushed, hallowed halls of Silicon Valley, on the trading floors of Tokyo and Frankfurt, and in the secure data centers that powered the modern world. Richard Sterling, Genevieve's father, was a titan of technology, the reclusive genius behind Ethelred Corporation. Ethelred wasn't just a company. It was an institution, a pioneer in quantum computing, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. Its wealth was vast, its influence immeasurable, and Genevieve was its sole heiress. This was the secret she had guarded for over 7 years. It wasn't born of shame, but of a deep, aching desire for normalcy. Growing up in a sprawling Atherton estate, she had seen firsthand what the Sterling name did to people. Suitors saw a walking trust fund, friends saw an opportunity, and the world saw a symbol, not a person. Every relationship was transactional, every kindness suspect. After a particularly painful betrayal in college, where a man she thought she loved had attempted to sell her private correspondence to a tabloid, she had made a decision. She broke away. With her father's reluctant blessing and a small, untraceable trust to live on, she had moved to New York, changed her last name to her mother's maiden name, Ross, and reinvented herself. She became Genevieve Ross, a bright but unassuming art history graduate who found a quiet joy in her job at a local library and later as a junior curator at a small gallery. She wanted to be loved for her mind, her quiet wit, her gentle heart, not for the 9 zeros, that followed her name. And then she met Jonathan Devereux. He was a rising star in real estate, hungry-driven and charismatic. He saw her at a charity auction, not as she bid on a priceless painting, but as she was passionately explaining the history of a minor landscape sketch to an elderly patron. He had been captivated, he said, by her passion and her intelligence. He pursued her relentlessly. He loved her stories about her modest upbringing in upstate New York, her tales of a quiet academic family. He loved, he claimed, that she was real and uncomplicated. She had fallen for it completely. She had believed she had finally found it, a love that was hers alone, untainted by the shadow of Ethelred. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. The very ordinariness he claimed to adore was the same thing he now despised her for. The morning after Jonathan's departure, the penthouse felt alien. The minimalist furniture, the curated art, the sweeping views, it was all his, a stage set for the life he wanted to project. Genevieve packed a single suitcase. She took no jewelry, no designer clothes, just her personal effects, a few beloved books, and the ultrasound photo which she now carried like a sacred text. As she waited for the elevator, Jonathan's personal assistant, a brisk young woman named Bethany, arrived with a courier. "Mr. Devereaux asked me to deliver this," Bethany said, her gaze carefully avoiding Genevieve's face. She handed over a thick envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $1 million and a brutally concise legal document outlining the terms of her departure. A gag order was included, preventing her from ever speaking publicly about their marriage. It was a severance package, a corporate dismissal. Genevieve looked at the check at the crisp printed numbers that were meant to erase 5 years of her life and the existence of their child. A cold fury, purer and harder than any emotion she had ever felt, settled in her heart. She took a pen from her purse, wrote "void" in large, sharp letters across the front of the check, and handed it back to the stunned assistant. "Give this back to him," Genevieve said, her voice level, "and tell him his calculations are off. He's about to learn the true cost of his assets." Without another word, she stepped into the elevator, leaving the gilded cage behind forever. Her first call was not to her father. Richard Sterling was a brilliant man, but his solution would be a sledgehammer buy Devereaux Holdings and crush it overnight. Genevieve wanted something more personal. She wanted justice, not just brute force. She called the one man who had been her family's confidant and protector for 3 decades, Arthur Abernathy. Mr. Abernathy was the senior partner at Abernathy, Finch & Thorne, a law firm so discreet and powerful it didn't need a sign on its antiqued oak doors. His office was a sanctuary of old leather rare books and quiet authority. He greeted Genevieve not as a client, but as the niece he had practically watched grow up. He listened without interruption as she recounted the entire story, his kind, wrinkled face hardening into a mask of cold indignation as she spoke of Jonathan's cruelty and the dismissal of her pregnancy. When she finished, he removed his spectacles and polished them slowly. "That man," Mr. Abernathy began, his voice a low rumble, "is a fool of the highest order. He has not only grievously wounded you, my dear, but he has committed an act of spectacular self-destruction. He thinks I'm going to take the $1 million and disappear," Genevieve said, placing the voided check on his polished desk. Abernathy glanced at it and chuckled a dry, humorless sound. $1 million. He might as well have tried to pay for the sun with a handful of sand. He has no idea who you are. "That's the point. He never did," she said. "Arthur, the prenup he had me sign. He thinks it protects him." Abernathy steepled his fingers. "I remember that document. Your father and I reviewed it against your wishes. We insisted on a few minor amendments, which his arrogant legal team overlooked in their haste. Specifically the infidelity clause. His very public affair with this Victoria Vance renders the entire financial settlement section null and void. He has opened the door for you to claim a full half of the marital assets." "I don't want his money," Genevieve stated firmly. "Not in that way. I don't want to take half of what he built. I want to take all of it." Abernathy raised an eyebrow, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "An interesting distinction. You are not seeking compensation. You are seeking retribution." "I'm seeking to protect my child," she corrected gently, but with an iron will. "A man who would so easily discard his own family for fame and a bigger fortune is a liability. His empire is a threat. It's built on a foundation of deceit, and I want to dismantle it brick by brick until nothing is left but the truth." "A laudable if complex goal," Abernathy mused. "Devereaux Holdings is a public company. Its value is tied to investor confidence and public perception. A messy divorce from a mysterious wife could harm it. A messy divorce from the heiress to Ethelred Corporation would be a cataclysm." I don't want to just reveal myself yet. Genevieve said her mind already working the strategic part of her brain, her father's brain, kicking into gear. That's too simple. He'll be a pariah, but he'll still have the core of his company. I want to know what he's built his kingdom on. I want to see the cracks in the foundation before I bring the walls down. Abernathy smiled. It was the smile of a chess master who sees the board 20 moves ahead. You are indeed Richard Sterling's daughter. You don't want to just knock the king over. You want a checkmate so absolute he never even knew the game had begun. He leaned forward, his demeanor shifting from paternal comfort to that of a seasoned general. Very well. Here is what we do. You will disappear. We will set you up in a secure private residence. No contact with anyone from your old life. Meanwhile, I will assemble a team, the best forensic accountants in the country, the most discreet private investigators. They will not be digging for dirt, Genevieve. They will be conducting a full-scale archaeological excavation of Jonathan Devereux's entire life and business. He picked up the voided check. He thinks this is your value. We will show him his error. While he is flaunting his new life in the tabloids, we will be operating in the shadows. He will be so blinded by the spotlight, he won't even see the ground crumbling beneath his feet. Leaving Abernathy's office, Genevieve felt a profound shift within herself. The heartbroken wife was gone. In her place was a woman with a purpose, a future queen reclaiming her power. She was no longer Genevieve Devereux, the discarded wife, or Genevieve Ross, the quiet curator. She was Genevieve Sterling, and a storm was coming to New York. While Genevieve retreated into the shadows, Jonathan Devereux and Victoria Vance exploded into the light. They were an inferno of publicity, their every move chronicled by a ravenous media. Paparazzi shots showed them laughing on a yacht in St. Bart's, kissing under the Eiffel Tower, and gracing the red carpet at the Met Gala. Jonathan with Victoria on his arm was more than a real estate mogul. He was a celebrity, an icon of success and virility. Victoria, for her part, reveled in the attention. She launched a lifestyle brand, Vance, funded entirely by Jonathan's seemingly bottomless pockets. It was a vapid collection of overpriced candles, silk pajamas, and wellness teas. But the press adored it. Jonathan saw her not just as a lover, but as a strategic asset, a beautiful face to bolster his brand. He felt invincible. His ex-wife, Genevieve, had vanished as he'd commanded. The $1 million check had been returned, which he interpreted as a petty emotional gesture from a scorned woman. He imagined she had crawled back to whatever mediocre life she came from her brief flight into the stratosphere of his world, now just a bitter memory. He never gave her another thought. His focus was singular, the apex tower. It was to be his masterpiece, a spiraling futuristic skyscraper on the last prime piece of undeveloped land in Midtown Manhattan. It was a project of staggering ambition and astronomical cost, a $3 billion gamble that would cement his legacy. The project required a consortium of international investors and a labyrinth of city permits, all of which Jonathan was masterfully juggling. The groundbreaking was 6 months away, and its success was paramount. Meanwhile, in a discreet, soundproofed suite at a private residential hotel, under a pseudonym, Genevieve was building her war room. The space was a stark contrast to her former life. No art, no personal touches, just a suite of high-end computers, encrypted communication arrays, and a large digital whiteboard filled with complex diagrams of Devereux Holdings' corporate structure. Mr. Abernathy's team was ruthlessly efficient. They were the librarians. A nickname Genevieve had given them, a nod to her old life. The team consisted of a former SEC investigator, a world-renowned forensic accountant who had untangled the finances of fallen dictators, and a white-hat hacker who owed Richard Sterling a life-altering favor. They began to feed Genevieve a torrent of data. Every transaction, every email, every contract Jonathan had signed for the past decade was digitized, cross-referenced, and analyzed by proprietary Ethelred data mining algorithms. Genevieve, with her sharp, analytical mind, was not a passive observer. She was the commander, directing their inquiries and spotting patterns others might miss. The first crack appeared not in his business, but in his personal life. Jonathan had always maintained that the seed money for his first major property deal came from a modest inheritance. The librarians found otherwise. The money, a sum of $2 million, had been wired from an offshore account belonging to his first boss and mentor, a man named Walter Pierce, who had died suddenly of a heart attack just weeks after the transfer. The official story was that Pierce, a father figure to Jonathan, had gifted him the money. The reality buried in encrypted and deleted emails recovered from an old server was far darker. Jonathan had discovered Pierce was having an affair and had systematically blackmailed him for the startup capital. He didn't build his company on an inheritance, Genevieve said to Abernathy over a secure video link. He built it on extortion. This is damning, but it's a personal matter from long ago. Hard to prosecute, easy for him to spin, Abernathy cautioned. I'm not looking to prosecute him for that, Genevieve replied, her eyes fixed on the screen. I'm looking for a pattern. If he was willing to do that, then what is he willing to do now? The answer came a week later, hidden within the mountain of paperwork for the Apex Tower project. Devereaux Holdings had acquired the final crucial parcel of land for the tower from a small, family-owned manufacturing business that had operated on the site for a century. The official record showed a straightforward sale with the family willingly relocating, but the forensic accountant, a stoic woman named Miss Davies, found a series of shell corporations and intermediary buyers that deliberately obfuscated the final purchaser. More disturbingly, she flagged a series of payments from one of these shell companies to an account linked to a city councilman, Robert Hines. Hines was the chairman of the zoning committee that had controversially approved the rezoning of that exact parcel of land from industrial to high-density commercial, multiplying its value tenfold overnight. He didn't just buy the land, Genevieve murmured, tracing the flow of money on the screen. He bought the zoning change. The hacker, a young man who went only by Cypher, dug deeper. He accessed city server backups and found the original zoning proposal. It had been rejected. Then 2 days after the payments were made to Councilman Hines, a revised application was submitted and fast-tracked for approval. This was the cornerstone of his empire. The Apex Tower, his crowning achievement, was built on a foundation of bribery and political corruption. Now Genevieve had to decide how to use this information. A direct leak to the press would be explosive, but Jonathan was a master of public relations. He would sacrifice the councilman claim he was the victim of a rogue employee and weather the storm. She needed a more insidious approach. She needed to be a ghost in his machine. Her target was not Jonathan himself, but the confidence of his investors. The consortium funding the Apex Tower was led by a notoriously risk-averse Japanese investment firm, Mitsui Global. Genevieve, using her innate understanding of both technology and human psychology, devised a plan. Through Athelred's vast resources, she identified a senior risk analyst at Mitsui Global, a man named Kenji Tanaka. Cypher then executed a flawless spear-phishing attack, not with a malicious link, but with a series of perfectly crafted, innocuous-looking emails that seemed to come from industry colleagues. Buried within the metadata of a seemingly harmless PDF, an industry report on New York real estate trends, was a tiny, untraceable data packet. The packet did nothing but sit on Mitsui's server dormant. Then one evening it activated. It didn't steal data or cause damage. It simply altered a single digit in a dozen financial projections related to the Apex Tower's expected return on investment. A 7 became a 1. A 9 became a 3. The changes were so small, so scattered, they would evade standard security sweeps, but they were enough to subtly poison the well. The next morning, when Tanaka ran his quarterly risk assessment models, the algorithm spat out a series of red flags. The projected ROI had dipped below the firm's acceptable threshold. The risk of default, according to the model, had spiked by a statistically significant margin. Tanaka, a man who trusted numbers above all else, was alarmed. He couldn't find the source of the discrepancy, but the numbers were the numbers. He immediately flagged the Devereaux project for an emergency internal review. Simultaneously, Genevieve made her second move. She used a trusted Ethelred contact to anonymously feed a single verifiable fact to a notoriously tenacious financial blogger known for his deep dives into corporate malfeasance. The tip wasn't about the bribery. It was simpler. It was proof that one of the primary construction material suppliers for the Apex Tower had lied on its environmental impact statement, a fact the librarians had uncovered while vetting every contractor. The blog post was a bombshell. It didn't accuse Devereaux of wrongdoing directly, but it raised serious questions about the due diligence of his team. The headline read, "The Apex Tower, cracks in the facade. Before the first brick is laid." The effect was immediate. The blog post, combined with the internal red flags at Mitsui Global, created a perfect storm of doubt. The Japanese investors didn't pull out, but they did something almost as damaging. They publicly announced a temporary suspension of their next round of funding, pending a comprehensive project review. Jonathan Devereaux woke up one Tuesday morning to find that the unshakable foundation of his legacy project had developed a hairline fracture. He had no idea who was responsible. He blamed rival developers, short sellers, and incompetent subordinates. He never once considered the quiet, ordinary woman he had thrown away. He was fighting shadows, unaware that the ghost in his machine was his own wife, silently and systematically beginning the process of his demolition. The suspension of funding from Mitsui Global was not a catastrophe, but it was a significant blow. For a man like Jonathan Devereaux, whose entire brand was built on an image of unstoppable momentum, any pause was a sign of weakness. And in the shark tank of New York real estate, the scent of blood travels fast. His rival, a shrewd older developer named Harrison Croft, who Jonathan had publicly belittled on numerous occasions, began making subtle inquiries with the other investors in the Apex consortium. Financial journalists from the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg started digging into Devereaux Holdings' financials, sensing a larger story. Jonathan was suddenly on the defensive, spending his days in damage control meetings and his nights forcing smiles at industry events to project an aura of calm confidence. The pressure began to fray the edges of his carefully curated life. The easy charm was replaced by a short temper. His arguments with Victoria became more frequent and more public. She had signed on to be the girlfriend of the King of New York, not the partner of a stressed-out executive facing a financial crisis. "Why are all our cards being declined?" she demanded one afternoon, storming into his home office. She threw a platinum credit card onto his desk. "It was embarrassing, Jonathan. I was at Bergdorf's. There's a temporary hold on some corporate accounts pending the project review," he snapped, not looking up from his computer screen. "Just use one of the other cards." "They're all like that. What is going on?" "That horrible blogger is writing about you again, and people are whispering. They said the Apex Tower is stalled. Is it true?" "It's a minor delay," he lied, rubbing his temples. "A procedural hiccup. It's being handled." "Well, handle it faster," she said, her voice sharp. My brand launch is next month. We're hosting the party on the future site of the Vance headquarters, the top floor of your tower. I need to know it's going to be there." Her complete lack of concern for his predicament, her selfish focus on her own brand, grated on him. In a fleeting, unwelcome thought, he remembered how Genevieve would have reacted. She would have sat with him, made him coffee, listened patiently, and then, in her quiet way, offered a perspective so insightful it would untangle the entire problem. The thought was so jarring, he pushed it away with a fresh wave of anger. From her command center, Genevieve watched his unraveling with a cold, detached precision. The librarians were now focused on Jonathan's core business, the portfolio of commercial and residential properties that formed the bulk of Devereux Holdings. The public records showed a string of successful, profitable buildings, but the internal documents, painstakingly reassembled from deleted files and server ghosts, told a different story. Ms. Davies, the accountant, made the key discovery. Jonathan's declared profits were artificially inflated. He was using a highly questionable and borderline fraudulent accounting practice. He was capitalizing expenses that should have been recorded on the income statement, things like extensive repair costs and marketing fees, and listing them as assets on the balance sheet. This made his properties look far more profitable and valuable than they actually were. It was a classic house of cards. As long as he kept acquiring new properties and securing new funding, the scheme could continue. But the moment the flow of cash stopped, as it had with the Apex Tower, the entire structure was at risk of collapse. "He's not a genius," Genevieve said, staring at the falsified balance sheets. "He's a gambler on a winning streak, and it's about to end." It was time for the next move. This one would be more direct a strike at the heart of his perceived financial acumen. Through a different set of cutouts, Abernathy's team leaked a bundle of anonymized but verifiable internal financial documents to a ratings agency, the kind of firm that assesses the creditworthiness of corporations. The leak was a masterpiece of subtlety. It didn't contain the smoking gun of the bribery or the blackmail. It simply contained enough raw data, expense reports, maintenance invoices, and conflicting internal profit projections to make any competent analyst raise a serious eyebrow. It was designed to prompt the agency to initiate its own investigation. 2 weeks later, it happened. The ratings agency, citing concerns over accounting irregularities and a lack of transparency in asset valuation, placed Devereux Holdings on a credit watch with negative implications. The Wall Street Journal headline the next day was brutal. Devereux Holdings under scrutiny ratings agency warns of accounting irregularities. The stock market responded instantly. By noon, DH stock had plummeted by 35%. Billions of dollars in market capitalization vanished in a matter of hours. Jonathan was trapped in a whirlwind of margin calls from the banks that had loaned him money against his stock holdings. He was forced to start selling off his personal assets to cover the calls: a jet, a collection of vintage cars, a villa in Tuscany. His world was shrinking, the walls closing in. He became paranoid, accusing his inner circle of betrayal. He fired his CFO, a man who had been with him for a decade, accusing him of being the source of the leak. He put his entire staff under intense scrutiny, creating a toxic atmosphere of fear and suspicion. The most profound twist, however, came not from the financial markets, but from the private investigation into his life. The investigator, a quiet ex-FBI agent, had been looking into the blackmail of Walter Pierce, Jonathan's first mentor. He had managed to track down Pierce's daughter, a woman now in her late 40s, living in Oregon. The investigator met with her under a pretext, and during their conversation, he learned something that changed the entire equation. Walter Pierce hadn't just been having an affair. He had been in a long-term, loving relationship with another man. In the hyper-masculine world of 1990s real estate, such a revelation would have destroyed him both professionally and personally. Jonathan's blackmail hadn't just been about money. It had been an act of devastating personal cruelty, leveraging a man's deepest secret against him. But there was more. The daughter revealed that in the weeks before his death, her father had been racked with guilt and anxiety. He had decided to come clean to his wife and his business partners and to expose Jonathan for the extortion. He had drafted a full confession, a handwritten letter, which he kept in a safe deposit box. He died of a massive heart attack the night before he planned to retrieve it. The daughter, unaware of its contents, had kept the box and its key as a memento of her father. After gentle persuasion from the investigator, she agreed to open it. Inside was the letter, a full detailed confession of Jonathan's crime, written in the victim's own hand. When Mr. Abernathy presented a scanned copy of the letter to Genevieve, she felt a chill run down her spine. This was no longer just about corporate malfeasance. This was about a man whose ambition was so cancerous it had potentially hounded another human being to his death. She now held irrefutable proof of bribery, financial fraud, and now a 20-year-old case of blackmail and extortion. She held every card. She could destroy him in the courts, in the press, and on Wall Street. But a public crucifixion felt too simple. It would turn him into a spectacle, a villain in a drama that would eventually fade. Genevieve wanted something more profound. She wanted him to face, not the public's judgment, but his own choices, his own emptiness. She wanted him to see the woman he had discarded, the nobody, as the architect of his downfall. It was time to step out of the shadows. The final act would not take place in a courtroom, but in the heart of his own glittering artificial world. The stage was set for the Vance brand launch party, an event Jonathan had insisted on going forward with a desperate attempt to project strength and stability to the world. It would be his last party as a king. The gala for the launch of Victoria Vance's lifestyle brand was the epitome of hollow extravagance. Held in a vast, raw space on the 50th floor of a downtown skyscraper, chosen for its views of the future Apex Tower site, the event was a desperate attempt to shore up Jonathan's crumbling image. The champagne was vintage, the guest list was a who's who of fashion, media and finance, and the air was thick with forced smiles and whispered gossip. Jonathan stood near the entrance, a frozen grimace plastered on his face. He looked haggard, the stress of the past few weeks having carved new lines around his eyes. He played the part of the proud partner, but his every gesture was tense. He was a king presiding over a court that was ready to turn on him at a moment's notice. Victoria, oblivious, or simply indifferent to his turmoil, floated through the room in a glittering silver dress soaking up the attention. The party was in full swing when a hush fell over the entrance. The sea of chattering guests parted their heads, turning in unison towards the door. Stepping into the room was a woman of such poise and commanding presence that she seemed to draw all the light towards her. She wore a simple but exquisitely tailored emerald green gown that accentuated her now visible pregnancy. Her hair was styled in elegant waves, and her neck was adorned with a single breathtaking diamond necklace, the legendary sterling star. She was, in a word, magnificent. Jonathan stared, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. It was Genevieve. But it wasn't the quiet, unassuming woman he had cast aside. This was someone else entirely. A woman who radiated a power and confidence that made everyone else in the room, including Victoria Vance, look like a pale imitation. Before he could react, a second figure appeared behind her, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was Richard Sterling, the mythical reclusive founder of Ethelred Corporation, A man who had not made a public appearance in over a decade was standing there, his hand placed gently on Genevieve's back. He looked at her with an expression of immense paternal pride. In that single moment, every piece of the puzzle clicked into place for the assembled elite of New York. The financial reporters, the tech investors, the society mavens, they all understood. Jonathan Devereux hadn't just divorced some unknown librarian. He had divorced the sole heiress to one of the largest technology fortunes on the planet. The whispers turned into a roar of frantic speculation. Cameras flashed, phones were raised, and the story of the century began to write itself in real time. Genevieve's eyes locked with Jonathan's across the crowded room. She saw the dawning horror on his face, the blood draining from it, as he realized the catastrophic scale of his miscalculation. She gave him a small, cold smile and began to walk towards him, her father by her side. The crowd parted for them as if they were royalty. Victoria, seeing her spotlight stolen, rushed to Jonathan's side, her face a mask of confusion and anger. "Who is she?" she hissed. "What is going on?" Jonathan couldn't speak. He was paralyzed watching the ghost of his past life glide towards him, transformed into the harbinger of his doom. Genevieve stopped a few feet from him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm was more terrifying than any scream. "Hello, Jonathan," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "You're looking stressed." "Genevieve, what is this?" He stammered, his eyes darting towards Richard Sterling, then back to her. "This is what you call a complication," she replied, her hand moving to rest on her baby bump. "I believe your exact words were, a problem to be managed." Richard Sterling stepped forward slightly. His voice, though quiet, carried the immense weight of his authority. "Mr. Devereux, my daughter has informed me of your business practices. They are, to put it mildly, unimpressive." Jonathan flinched as if struck. Before he could formulate a response, Genevieve took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "We don't need to have this conversation here," she said, her voice dropping so only he and a stunned Victoria could hear. "But I want you to understand your position. My team has spent the last few months conducting a thorough review of your company and your life." She laid out the facts with the precision of a surgeon. "We know about the fraudulent accounting that's keeping your company afloat. We know about the bribery of Councilman Hines to secure the zoning for your precious tower. And Jonathan," her voice became ice, "we have the handwritten letter from Walter Pierce detailing how you blackmailed him for your seed money." Jonathan's face turned ashen. Every secret, every crime he had buried was being laid bare in the middle of his own party. "You have two options," Genevieve continued her tone, leaving no room for negotiation. "Option A. You release a statement tonight, announcing your immediate retirement due to personal reasons. You will oversee the complete dissolution of Devereux Holdings. Every asset will be liquidated to repay your investors and the banks in full. You will make a full anonymous restitution to Walter Pierce's family. And you will plead guilty to the lesser charges of financial fraud for which my father's lawyers have already negotiated a deal that involves a hefty fine and probation, but no jail time. Then you will disappear. You will leave New York and never work in this country again. And option B," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Option B," she said, "is that I walk over to that reporter from the Wall Street Journal and I give her everything. The financials, the proof of bribery, the blackmail letter. The SEC, the district attorney, and the IRS will descend on you by sunrise. The charges will include grand larceny, wire fraud, and conspiracy. You will spend the next 20 years of your life in a federal prison. Your name will become a cautionary tale for greedy, foolish men." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "The choice is yours. You have 5 minutes." As Genevieve spoke, Victoria's eyes darted between her and Jonathan, her sharp mind calculating the trajectory of this sinking ship. The dream of being Mrs. Devereux, the Queen of New York, was evaporating before her eyes. Survival instincts kicked in. As Genevieve finished her ultimatum, Victoria took a deliberate step away from Jonathan. She turned to a nearby reporter from page 6. Her face, a perfect portrait of shocked innocence. "I had no idea," she exclaimed, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "He deceived me. He told me she was no one. I am a victim in all of this. I can't be associated with a man like that." It was the final, perfect betrayal. The woman for whom he had thrown everything away was now the first to abandon him, positioning herself as a fellow victim to save her own skin. Jonathan looked at Victoria's back, then at Genevieve's resolute face, and something inside him finally broke. The arrogance, the charm, the ruthless ambition, it all crumbled away, leaving behind a hollow, defeated man. He had lost everything, and the person who had taken it all was the ordinary, simple woman he had deemed worthless. He looked at Genevieve, at the child she carried, his child, and for the first time he saw not a complication, but the legacy he had so casually discarded. "Option A," he croaked the words, barely audible. "I'll take option A." Genevieve nodded once. She had won. It wasn't a loud, fiery victory, but a quiet, absolute checkmate. She turned without another word, and with her father's arm securely around her, walked out of the party, leaving the ruins of Jonathan Devereux's life behind her. The fall of Jonathan Devereux was as swift as it was brutal. True to his word, a press release was issued before midnight announcing his immediate retirement from all business activities to focus on personal matters. The next day, the board of Devereux Holdings, under immense pressure from a suddenly terrified group of investors, initiated the process of corporate dissolution. The story dominated the news cycle for weeks, a spectacular tale of hubris and downfall. Jonathan Devereux, the Titan, became a ghost, vanishing from the public eye completely. Genevieve, however, did not revel in her victory. She had not orchestrated his demise for the sake of revenge, but for the sake of justice. She had no interest in the blood money from his liquidated empire. Instead, she instructed Mr. Abernathy to perform one final task. After every investor, bank, and creditor had been made whole, there was still a substantial sum remaining Jonathan's personal profits from years of deceit. Genevieve directed that every last dollar be channeled into establishing a new charitable foundation. She called it the Sterling Ross Foundation, combining her father's name with the name she had chosen for herself when she sought a life of her own. The foundation's mission was twofold: to provide housing and legal support for single mothers facing economic hardship, and to fund financial literacy programs for women who had been victims of economic abuse. It was a mission born from her own pain, transformed into a vessel of hope for others. She didn't take over his company or build on its ruins. She erased it, and from its ashes she cultivated something clean and purposeful. 6 months later, the winter snow had melted, and a fragile spring was blooming in New York City. A pregnant Genevieve Sterling stood on a formerly derelict lot in the Bronx. She was not wearing a designer gown, but a simple dress and a practical coat. The flashbulbs were still there, but this time they were not capturing a drama of betrayal, but a moment of creation. She held a silver shovel ready to break ground on the foundation's first project, a state-of-the-art residential center for women and children offering not just shelter, but job training, childcare, and legal aid. Her father stood beside her, his face beaming with a pride that transcended his fortune. Mr. Abernathy was in the small crowd, smiling warmly. A reporter called out from the scrum. "Ms. Sterling, after everything that happened, do you have any message for other women?" Genevieve paused, looking out at the crowd, her hand resting on her belly. She was no longer hiding. She was a Sterling, yes. But she was also her own woman, defined not by the man she had married or the father she was born to, but by the choices she was making now. "My message is simple," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying over the clicks of the cameras. "Your worth is not determined by who you are with or what you have. It is forged in your resilience. It is measured by your integrity. Never let anyone make you feel ordinary. Every woman is the heiress to her own strength. You just have to decide when to claim your inheritance." She smiled a genuine, radiant smile. Then, with a firm press of her foot, she drove the shovel into the earth, marking the beginning of a new legacy. It was a legacy not of glass towers and inflated stock prices, but of compassion and empowerment. A legacy she would one day be proud to share with her child, a story not of a broken marriage, but of a woman who, when faced with the ultimate betrayal, refused to be a victim and chose instead to become a founder. And that is the incredible story of Genevieve Sterling, a story that proves that the quietest person in the room can often be the most powerful. She endured a heart-shattering betrayal, but refused to let it define her. Instead of simply seeking revenge, she sought justice and created a legacy of hope from the rubble of her husband's lies. Her journey is a powerful reminder that our true identity isn't about our name or our bank account, but about our character and the strength we show when we have nothing left to lose. If her story of resilience and triumph moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of strength, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories that will inspire and amaze you. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.